So today we're going to talk about Mrs. Dalloway, which is a novel by the English writer Virginia Woolf. Mrs. Dalloway was published in 1925. The novel takes place during one single day in the life of Clarissa Dalloway. But before I go into the book itself, I would like to talk a little bit about its author, Virginia Woolf, because she is hands down one of the most important English writers of all time, and I think her life was fascinating. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, what I think you need to know to enjoy this book more. So she was born Adeline Virginia Stevens in 1882, and her family was both artistic and wealthy, which is a great combination. In 1912, she married the editor Leonard Woolf, and in 1917, the couple founded a publishing house, which they called Hogarth Press, through which Virginia published all her books. So what started as a hobby for Virginia Woolf and her husband Leonard soon became a business. Hogarth Press was a small publishing house, but it was influential. Apart from publishing Woolf's own books, they also published works by important writers of the time, such as Ian Forster, T.S. Eliot, Henry Green, and in translation, works by Sigmund Freud or Dostoevsky, among many others. I believe Hogarth Press were in fact the first to publish Freud in English, but I could be wrong about this. And of course, Virginia Woolf famously refused to publish Ulysses by James Joyce. Luckily for us, other publishers picked it up. Well, Virginia Woolf and her husband were also part of an important group of British intellectuals, writers, and artists known as the Bloomsbury Group. You might have heard about this group. Who else belonged to this group? Also the likes of Ian Forster, Lytton Strachey, among others. I do love Ian Forster's writing, but I actually know very little about the Bloomsbury Group as a whole. However, there are lots of books about the group and even movies inspired by it. So it is easy to find out information about the Bloomsbury Group and about their ideas and their activities if you're interested. And of course, if you have any recommendations of your own about the Bloomsbury Group, about books or movies about them, please feel free to share them in the comment section below. Anyway, the important thing to know from all of this is that Virginia Woolf belonged to the English literary and artistic elite of her time. Apart from that, I feel like I need to talk about Virginia Woolf's mental health and what we know about it, because I'm not trying to pry into her life. I think it's particularly relevant to know this if we are to approach Mrs. Dalloway. There seems to be a consensus now that Virginia Woolf was bipolar. Now, I don't have a background in mental health, but I do know that bipolar disorder is characterized by alternating periods of depression and extreme excitement. And what we now call bipolar disorder, I think, used to be referred to as manic depression not that long ago, actually, in my lifetime. Now, I'm not entirely sure of when the terminology changed, but I do know that during Virginia Woolf's time, she would not have been diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. Now, because of her mood swings from depression to manic excitement, together with some psychotic episodes that she went through, Virginia's family just thought that she was mad. Now, what matters to me is how her mental health and her mental health issues made their way into her writing. And Mrs. Dalloway is no exception to that. The border between madness and sanity is something that we see very clearly in Mrs. Dalloway as a major theme. I would say it's one of the big themes in the novel. And we see this, for example, in one of the main characters of the novel, Septimus Warren Smith. Now, this character suffers from what was then known as shell shock. What does that mean? Shell shock means that his participation as a soldier in World War I had left him traumatized. Now, shell shock was the name given to that specific type of, we would say now, post-traumatic disorder that people who fought in World War I experienced. And the main character, Clarissa Dalloway, is almost the flip side of the same coin. There is an interesting parallel between both characters, Clarissa and Septimus. So, while Septimus is deeply traumatized and actually still struggles to attain any resemblance of sanity even after the war, for Clarissa, keeping her sanity is of the utmost importance. Clarissa is normal. Her life and how she conducts it represents sanity, I would say, while Septimus is an insane character. And of course, you know, when I talk about sanity and insanity, I don't mean to be insensitive. I use those terms because I think they would have been current at the time the novel was written. And also insane and sane and insane are also conversationally current today. Also, and this perhaps seems like an obvious thing to say, I'm not talking about real people here. I'm talking about fictional characters, right? So I think it is important to understand the context in which a novel was written. Of course, you know, this is one of the challenges of reading classics, or if not classics, at least reading fiction that was written way before our time. So Mrs. Dalloway is a novel from the 1920s, written by an author who was born in the late 19th century. So psychiatric treatment, which, you know, because of her mental health issues, was not foreign to Virginia Woolf, was no doubt very different in that time period in the 1920s to what it is possibly today. And again, I don't have a background in it. And if anyone watching this video actually has a background in mental health and also likes Mrs. Dalloway, please feel free to discuss this issue in the comment section, because I think it would be really illuminating for everyone. So I'm only going to skirt around the issue of mental health because my background is in literary studies and not in medicine or even in psychology. But my general idea of all of this is that back then in the 1920s, the difference between sanity and insanity was clear-cut, or was thought as clear-cut, and I think we can see that in Mrs. Dalloway with Clarissa and Septimus. Each of those two characters standing firmly on one of the camps, on sane or insane camp. Now, going back to Virginia Woolf's life, she did suffer a lot because of her mental disorder, so much so that she sadly ended her own life in 1941 when she was only 59 years old. Now, Virginia Woolf had lost her mother when she was only 13, and then only a couple of years later, her half-sister Stella Duckworth, who had become a sort of mother figure to young Virginia, also died. Now, Woolf's biographers pinpoint her first mental breakdowns to these two traumatizing events. And it is hard not to think what her life would have been like had she been born decades later, and whether advances in the study and treatment of mental health, perhaps, you know, whether they would have not had a positive impact on her life. But of course, we cannot know that. And also, as readers, would we have works as brilliant and as lucid as Mrs. Dalloway and many others that she wrote had Virginia Woolf been under medication for bipolar disorder? I don't have an answer to that question, nobody does. But her literary legacy, what we do have, is a fruit of her mind. And Virginia Woolf is one of the best, if not the best, and one of the most important writers of the 20th century. Nobody questions that. I've never heard anybody question that. So okay, let's go now into Mrs. Dalloway. As usual, there will be no spoilers in my review. The only plot elements that I will discuss are well known, and there will be the kind of thing that you would read on a dust jacket for the book, or in a description, kind of like a product description in an online bookstore. So here we go. Mrs. Dalloway, as I said, was written in 1925, but it is set in 1923 in the course of one single day in the month of June, so at the beginning of the summer season in England. The novel begins in the morning when Clarissa Dalloway famously goes out to buy flowers for a party that she's hosting that evening. Now, Clarissa runs around London getting what she needs for her party and thinking about her life and thinking about people she's known in the past or people she knows. Now, the day goes on, and when evening comes, the party takes place. And that's the plot in a nutshell, and as I promised, without any real spoilers. But of course, Mrs. Dalloway is a lot more than just the story of an upper-class English woman giving a party. In fact, that's not what the novel is about at all, okay? Because what matters in this novel is not what goes on outside, but the inner lives of the characters, mostly Clarissa, but also other characters, right? Particularly Clarissa, particularly the veteran soldier Septimus, Warren Smith, but also other characters. Now, the narrative structure of Mrs. Dalloway is wonderful. It's fascinating because we have an omniscient narrator who knows everything, like in Victorian novels. So a third-person narrator who tells us what's going on and what we're supposed to be paying attention to. But simultaneously, we're also privy to the characters' thoughts, which can be rambling at times, much as your thoughts or mine are often, right? So we call this technique or narrative device stream of consciousness. Now, apart from in the work of Virginia Woolf, we would find stream of consciousness in the writing by writers such as James Joyce, Marcel Proust, William Faulkner, and many others. It is a device that was used a lot from the early 20th century. So if you read a lot of literary fiction from the 20th century, you will find it a lot. But previous writers had given readers also access to their characters' thoughts well before the 20th century. And I'm thinking here, of course, of the wonderful My Beloved Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Sterne, which I have also reviewed on this channel. And it is a novel dear to me, and if you've watched that review, you'll know that, because I wrote my master's thesis on it. Anyway, going back to Mrs. Dalloway, the novel happens, as I say, in a single day, in June. So that's just like Ulysses by James Joyce, where the setting is, of course, Dublin and not London, right? So both novels, Mrs. Dalloway and Ulysses, were written at similar times, and they get inevitably compared. But here I need to confess that I have not read Ulysses yet. I will read it, and I will review it here. I just cannot tell you right now when that will happen. But stay tuned if you're interested, because I will definitely read it and review it. You know, I normally don't talk much about plots in my reviews because there are several reasons for this. The books that I read and review, in them, plot is not the most important element, I don't think. But also, I do think that talking plot is boring. And I don't think discussing the plot of a novel would ever, of a good novel, would ever entice anyone to pick it up. And Mrs. Dalloway is probably one of the best examples of this I could find, and I'll tell you why. The plot is just what I said earlier, a posh lady who goes around town during the day and then hosts a boring party for boring people in the evening. Now, if I told you this, I don't think I would sell you this novel, right? I wouldn't sell this novel to anyone. So let's talk about what actually makes Mrs. Dalloway one of the best novels ever written. So during that day, during the day the novel takes place, Clarissa Dalloway examines her life up to that very moment. she goes into every important life choice she has ever made. We get to know her in such an intimate way. We get to know how she feels about her husband. We get to know about who her true love is. No spoilers. What the best kiss she ever had was. No spoilers. And all of this because Virginia Woolf digs deep into her character's inner life. And by doing this, as we read along, we tend to begin to examine, or at least confront, our own life and the choices that we've made. So we could say that Clarissa has always chosen stability. She's made safe choices, right? And that is something that many people do in life as well, right? But then there's always that niggling thought in the back of our minds of what if? So what if we had made a different choice? Have we chosen to settle, perhaps? Do we question that sometimes? Do we have regrets about perhaps choosing what seemed to be the safe and reliable option at the time? So Clarissa reflects on all of this, although perhaps not as explicitly as I have just done. So she doesn't ask those explicit questions of herself, right? But it is clear to herself and to us that she has chosen sanity and safety. So if Clarissa is the sane, rational character in Mrs. Dalloway, Septimus is the flip side to that. So let's talk a bit about Septimus Warren Smith for a moment, the veteran from World War I in the novel. So his shell shock has left him feeling detached from society, and increasingly he feels more distant from his Italian wife Lucrezia. So Septimus and his wife happen to be in London on that very day in June, the day where the novel takes place. That's why they are part of the novel. Now, an obvious reading of Mrs. Dalloway would be to see both Clarissa and Septimus as two sides of Virginia Woolf's bipolar personality. And I'm probably not using the correct terminology, so apologize if anyone watching this knows more about mental health than I do if I use the wrong terminology. I don't mean to be offensive or anything like that, but because the way mental health was seen back then, this could be how Virginia Woolf saw it. I'm not saying that's how I see it, but that's how she could have seen it herself, and how she sought to perhaps reflect that in writing by using the characters, two characters, who are the two sides of the same coin, as it were. Okay, so what I am going to say now applies not only to Mrs. Dalloway, but also to, I think, all fiction by Virginia Woolf, at least all the books I've read by her, and I've read quite a few. I think what is important and what will give you pleasure in reading her novels, reading her fiction, is not the plot or even the characters, but what will give you pleasure, the point of reading Woolf, is in her masterful and original use of the English language. Now, the themes of her novels, what she talks about in her fiction, I don't think there's anything original or surprising or even, shocking about any of it. She deals with everyday life. And okay, I mean, you may not be an upper-class English woman living in London in the 1920s like Clarissa, and nor am I. But Clarissa, she's upper-class, whatever, but she is an ordinary character, and she is exactly the kind of person that Virginia Woolf would have been familiar with. I think Clarissa Dalloway is the kind of person, the kind of woman that she was used to socializing with. Now, there's nothing extraordinary about Clarissa's life. Now, the key to this novel and its importance and relevance is in the use of stream of consciousness. Woolf's narrative style was innovative, mainly because of her use of free indirect speech. This sounds complicated, but I'll try to explain it. So, free indirect speech is a style of third-person narration that uses some of the characteristics of traditional third-person narration, she did this, he did that, along with the essence of first-person direct speech. I did this, I did that. Okay, so it's third person, but it uses some of those elements from first person. So Woolf uses that free indirect speech to take us directly into her character's mind, so we can see the world through their individual subjectivity, while also maintaining a third-person omniscient narrator, so the novel makes sense and is not as difficult as you might think if you've never read it. So they might be confronted with the same reality in the novel, but Clarissa at different points, but Clarissa and Septimus would always see the same thing, right? But they would see that same thing in different ways, each of those ways reflecting their own state of mind. Now, because all of this, I think, readers tend to foster empathy for both characters, for both Clarissa and Septimus, and I think that's what, possibly that's what Virginia Woolf wanted, but I can say that, but it is what happens. It is what happens to me, at least. So Mrs. Dalloway is an introspective work of fiction, and it is a novel that makes me think about my life and about myself whenever I read it. Memory, and particularly how we have perhaps a few recurrent events that our mind tends to recall, and sometimes they even come into our minds, those events from the past, when we least expect them. And I'm sure most people experience this. I'm sure I'm not the only one. That is something that Woolf writes about so well in Mrs. Dalloway. So, okay, these are my thoughts on Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. But what are your thoughts on this wonderful novel? If you've read it, or if you're thinking of reading it soon, perhaps, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. In the meantime, this is all from me. My name is Juan, and I hope you're all doing very well, and I hope to see you again for another book review. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.